Okay, so thank you, Jackie. So I'm presenting our work on voice interfaces. This is work I did with my Joel and Stuart, who are here today, and also Sarah Sharples, who can't be here. So in today's talk, I'm going to do just three things. I'm going to briefly present some of our motivation and the background to our work, and then I'm going to present a single fragment of data for some families' actual use. So we're going to look at some people using the Amazon Echo, or some audio of that. And then finally, I'm going to unpack some of this data and tease out some implications. So it's all fairly standard for a Chi talk, which of course means there's much more in the paper. So I urge you to go and read the paper for much more information. Up front, and sort of prepping your questions, this paper is actually an examination of how people use the Amazon Echo in the home. So we're looking at how they bring the device use into conversation and how they engage with that use. But what we're not looking to do is to critique the Amazon Echo or voice interfaces or sort of the idea of these interfaces. So it's not really a product review. So although I may talk about the Amazon Echo, I don't want you to see as me critiquing that particular device. So I'm going to start by talking about our study and the background to that. So voice interfaces such as the Echo, Google Home, the Apple HomePod are intrinsically different to mobile devices in that they're designed for multi-party settings and they're designed for multiple users. Our interest in this is actually understanding how these devices then get used in these sorts of settings. You know, how is it that they get brought into a conversation when you have multiple people there interacting with each other? How do they bring in an Amazon Echo? And to do this, and in sort of much of the spirit of Peter's talk earlier, we drew on ethno methodology for this and some conversation analysis. And simply put, this means we were interested in working out what the practical and social accomplishment of users using such a technology was. And this should become a bit clearer throughout our talk, so I'm not going to talk too much about what that means. But in the same way that Peter said that Twitter is not a conversation in his stance, you know, actually we didn't want to look at this as a conversation either. So we didn't want to look at people using the Amazon Echo as a conversation. We wanted to look at it as if they were using a device, so getting this thing to work. So think of it as, you know, using your mobile phone or using any other piece of technology. And this is actually critical to understanding what we were doing, because it means you don't get caught up in sort of trying to fit conversation around it, but instead what you can do is actually look at, in very close detail, what people are doing. To capture our data, we did a number of ways of thinking about this, but we actually built a box to do this instead. So instead of just going and getting Amazon Echo data or Amazon Echo logs, we actually built a separate device that we called a conditional voice recorder, or CVR. And so this is sort of our ethical approach to data collection. It has a button to turn it off and on, and it has that lights to indicate when it's listening and recording. And it's a bit like a normal voice recorder or sort of dictation device. In fact, it's always listening when it's turned on, except that it keeps the last minute of audio always in a temporary memory. When people talk to the Amazon Echo, it saves that last minute, and then it records for one more minute. So what this gives us is some contextualizing information about the Echo use. So it gives us a minute before the talk, a minute before people talk to Alexa, and it gives us a minute afterwards. So you can start to understand how conversation's moving around the device. Okay. So for our study, we gave 5 families an Amazon Echo and this conditional voice recorder for a month long each. And we built a corpus of just 833 requests in this case. And this actually was formed into 180 or so sequences. And for us, a sequence is sort of temporal coherence. So this is, for example, people starting to use the device for some reason, and when they stop using the device, many queries later. So it could be one request, or it could be 20 requests on some sort of coherent activity. And so with this data, we had about 6 hours of sequences with an average length of 2 minutes and 2 seconds. So that's, if you think about it, that's like 1 or 2 requests typically. So I'm going to talk about one family for simplicity, and we've done this in the paper as well because it means you get to actually sort of understand the family a bit more and sort of understand the interactions that unfold. And we've called them the Kents. And there's 4 of them, so they're a nuclear family. It's Susan and Carl are the parents, and there's Emma, a daughter, and Liam, a son. And they're going to be eating a family meal together, so we're going to be looking into their home as they're eating this meal. And they've had the Echo for about a week at this point. And it's on a sideboard in their dining room. So it's like a bookcase / sideboard. So they're eating a meal together. It's Mother's Day, so that's going to be crucially important to understanding the interaction that unfolds. And they typically play things like quizzes at the table, or the parents will ask trivia questions to them. And since getting the Echo, they've been doing that with this as well. So they use two sorts of quizzes, and these on the Echo are called skills. So they're like third-party apps, basically. And there's two they particularly use. So one is called Beats the Intro, which plays a few seconds of a song, and you have to guess the artist and the song title. And the other is Quizmaster, which is a trivia quiz. I'm going to be presenting data, and I'm not sure how many people here are familiar with sort of Jeffersonian-esque transcription. So I'm just going to briefly, very quickly, sort of explain this so that you understand what I'm saying. So this is a made-up conversation here between A and B, so maybe Alice and Bob, as is convention. So we have Alice saying hello, we then have a 1.5 second pause, we have B saying oh, and then a sort of a micro pause, for maybe a tenth of a second or so. We then have some overlapping talk, which you'll see is quite important shortly. So we have here B saying hi there, and A saying how are you. We then have something that we can't transcribe, and there's many reasons for this, but it's actually just really hard sometimes to hear what people are saying. And then we also have non-verbal actions in double brackets. So we're going to listen to some audio, and I'm going to just play a clip and hope that everything works as we practiced. Okay? So the conversation will unfold as we watch.
Let's play Beat the Intro in a minute. Alexa, beat the intro.
That's Wallace time?
That's Wallace. Yeah, listen. You need to keep on eating your own stuff. Alexa,
And your own stuff.
play Beat the Intro.
Resuming the music.
Oh, yes.
Alexa, stop!
No!
Alexa, beat the intro.
What does it do?
No, it shouldn't like that. Alexa,
Is it called beat the intro?
play Beat the Intro.
You want to hear a station for BB intro, right?
No, I don't, Alexa. No.
Alright.
We played it the other night. The game we played the other night.
Alexa, skills beat the intro.
Shouldn't like that.
Alexa! Alexa, beat the intro.
Okay, so we're going to stop there. That should give you a flavour of some of the data we have. And I'm going to unpack some now. I keep pressing the B button. So I'm going to unpack some of the data, and we're going to look at sort of three things now of this sort of data. I'm going to play some sort of segments of that audio again, and sort of look at what's going on. So we're going to look at how sort of these devices get embedded in the multi-activity home, and you're probably already getting a flavour of that. And then we're going to look at sort of the notion of the term conversational interface, which is something that academics and sort of marketers have used quite a bit. And then finally, we're going to look at how these responses from the devices are actually used for action. So these are the 3 points I'm going to talk about here. There's obviously, as I've said, many more in the paper. So I want to start by demonstrating how the echo use gets interleaved while other activities are going on. So I'm going to play this clip again, so we can just laugh at it.
Let's play Beat the Intro in a minute. Alexa, beat the intro.
That's Wallace time?
That's Wallace. Yeah, listen.
Okay, so this is a very quick presentation, so I haven't got much time to play more audio, sadly. But let's first look at the top three lines. So Susan's offering a preparatory account for what she's about to do. So she's saying she would like to play Beat the Intro, and Liam responds with his initial, oh no. Susan presses on, however, with her initial instruction. Liam elaborates his negative sentiment about this, sort of with the elongated no. And then about 0.6 seconds in, Carl sort of leverages his Liam's compliance with what Susan is doing by reminding him it's Mother's Day, and he's sort of leveraging normative obligations for parenting and the rights that Susan is normatively seen to have. So Susan's instruction here to the Echo is sort of embedded amongst this conversation between the family. And then Susan then switches from using the device to addressing Liam, so she issues a directive about him eating his food. You know, you need to keep on eating your orange stuff. So Susan's interleaving parenting and it's sort of the interactional work of using the Echo. And then she later returns to using the Echo. So hopefully by unpacking this a little bit here today, you can start to see that interactions with voice interfaces occur in, through, and around everyday activities that are ongoing in the home. And we think that, for us, this rubs up against the existing design of one-at-a-time type interactions that we typically think about as designers. Real-world, complex, highly ordered, multi-activity settings are the norm, and this is actually the sort of setting that these devices are going into. They're not designed for necessarily discrete, focused interaction. And so I think for a takeaway for us, this is giving us a bit of a flavour of what we talk about when we say that using a voice interface is finely interleaved with activities in the home, but actually also that timing and placement of utterances to these devices and responses from them are also hugely important, because people fit these interactions with devices with split-second precision within their conversation with each other. And I'm going to change to a different fragment. So this is a bit later on in the evening. They're trying to play Quizmaster, so it's a more trivia-related quiz. And we're just going to see how perhaps something a bit different unfolds. I'm going to play some audio again.
Can you ask for another quiz?
Alexa, set us a family quiz.
Sorry, I can't find the answer to the question I heard.
Alexa, set a family quiz.
Sorry, I don't have the answer to that question.
Alexa, please set family quiz.
I wasn't able to understand the question I heard.
Alexa, family quiz.
Okay, so they do eventually get the skill open, I should say. But what we see here is a bit different. So Susan is addressing the Echo with an instruction to set us a family quiz. The Echo's response is, I can't find the answer to the question I heard. And this response is categorizing Susan's utterance as a question, which of course it's not, it's an instruction. This is important because it's sort of an error message, but it's offering little way of next possible action. We sort of talk about talk as being sequentially organized, and that one utterance follows another, and that there's some sort of coherence in conversation. But here this response is almost incoherent. It doesn't match the request that it's given to the device. Anyway, so what happens next? So Emma has a few places to go. So she repeats this Susan's utterance, but she with a slight variation. And this sort of repetition and variation is quite frequent with Amazon Echo use. So the device again responds with a similar miscategorization, saying, I don't have an answer to that question. And then we get Liam with another variation that displays a recognition of the situation and sort of transforms it into something amusing. So he says, please set a family quiz. So it's about having a bit of fun at the table as well. And then again, another similar response. And Carl finally ends with a very sort of short, abrupt Alexa family quiz. We also talk about this as an example of collaborative repair. And the point is that each response here from users is collaboratively produced. It's minutely varied, it's a repetition of the request, and it's aligned with the repeated unhelpfulness of responses from the device. And so we talk about this in the paper and we discuss it, but it seems to us that interaction with voice interfaces is very different from conversation as well when you actually start to look at these things. And hopefully we can see that these devices, the conversational interface is perhaps a confusion or a misnomer, and it's where we'd like to be in terms of design, but actually it's sort of getting in the way of what's going on. Voice interface input and output is very rigidly pre-configured by design. So we're asking ourselves, just tying ourselves to this notion of a conversational interface in terms of design work and what they can encourage third-party developers to do, is that getting in the way of designing something that works for users? And conceptually, we would perhaps consider moving towards a more simplistic notion of request-response design, as output and input to a computer or device. So I've lost my mouse, but okay. And then, the final piece of data I'm going to show today is from a fragment you've already seen, and we're going to contrast this back to that last piece of data I showed.
Alexa,
Is it called Beat the Intro?
play Beat the Intro.
You want to hear a station for BB intro, right?
No, I don't, Alexa. No.
All right.
Okay, so we actually think this is a very different piece of data, and this is actually perhaps something quite meaningful. So Emma instructs the Echo to play Beat the Intro, but I want to draw attention to how the response from the Echo lets Emma do something next. So the response incorporates a transcription of what the device has got. So it's got BB Intro, so as opposed to Beat the Intro. And it's also got, hear a station. So it's saying, I'm categorizing your request as a request for music, and it's formulating that as a question. So it's not only telling Emma what it understood, perhaps, or transcribed, but it's also giving her a next possible candidate action. And so obviously this is a mistake by the device and it hasn't quite got the right answer, but it gives her somewhere to go. So she's able to say, no, no I don't, Alexa. And so for us, this is actually quite important, because this is actually an example of what we would call response design, that allows the user to practically reason about the Echo's processing of the input, and it gives interactional resources to move on with using the device to progress on to what they're trying to do. So if you remember, I said at the start that our perspective is getting this thing to work. Well, actually, we think that this is actually enabling users perhaps maybe to do that a bit more. And so we have a number of takeaways with this as well. In fact, we should expect users to engage in attempts to fix what they are trying to say to a voice interface. So if they're trying to use this device, if they've bought this, it's in their home, we should expect them to engage in these sorts of practices. And that responses from the devices are heard as categorizations of what users are doing, and they also are resources for further action. So they actually allow users to do something next, to maybe repair a troublesome device interaction. So for us, building the request into response provides resources for users to make sense of problems, and by dispensing with conversational interface and considering the challenge of request-response design, instead we think it makes it simpler for users to get done what they want to do. So actually, with my presentation, I think the key takeaway is, perhaps with a lot of HCI, is how do we allow users to make sense of any problems they encounter in this device use? Problems will always occur with technology, and people try to make sense of them. So how do we make clear what that trouble was? So that's what I've done today, is hopefully give you a little flavour of our paper and showing you that we recorded natural interactions of Amazon Echo use in the home, and that we think voice interface interactions are embedded in the multi-activity home. But talk to these devices is a bit different from conversation. Perhaps request-response design is more realistic objective than conversational design, and that responses from voice interfaces are resources for practical action and reasoning, and for further action by members. Thank you. Okay. Okay.
Hi, Martin. Andrea Danielescu from Intel. So you mentioned that talk to Vuis is different from conversation, but you looked at Alexa, which is probably the least naturalistic conversational user interface on the market. Mm-hmm. How would you maybe modify that statement, or do you think that statement is still true for all the conversational systems out there right now?
For all the ones I've used, I would say it seems to be true. But I think for us, our perspective was, a voice interface is, like a graphical interface or any other sort of interface. So actually looking at it as in terms of people are trying to do stuff was more useful anyway. Perhaps the Echo is not the best at conversation, but actually people aren't necessarily trying to have a conversation with this anyway. They're trying to play a game in these cases or play music anyway. So considering it a conversation, although you could add conversational features, considering it a conversation is getting in the way of what we think is the user's perspective and the methods that the users are trying to employ.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Yaliang Zhuang from Eindhoven University of Technology. Mm-hmm. I have a question about the reaction about human and machine. Mm-hmm. For example, in your examples, I found the users try to adjust the intonation to say Alexa in different ways.
Yep.
How about the react from the Alexa? Did she try to adjust or make some different reaction to the users?
So, as I'm aware, I don't think any commercial interfaces respond to different prosody or pronunciation and stuff. So I haven't really seen the Echo or any other device responding to users in different ways, other than sort of different spoken talk, actual written words transcribed into speech. But so I haven't actually seen any. No, perhaps they will.
Or maybe my question is another way: is that if the user try to adjust their intonation, should Alexa also do some reaction to do that?
I haven't seen that, no. Maybe she should. I don't know, actually. It'd be interesting to try. So one of the things I would really like is I think a lot of these systems are quite closed down, which sort of makes experimentation quite difficult. So it would be really great as researchers if we could actually sort of fiddle with stuff to actually try these things out to see how people respond to that way.
Okay, thank you.